Vera is an elder amongst the radical community, I'm sure well known to most of you, with personal experience of the loss of environmental amenity with the extension of industry, the unemployed camps in the 1930s, and of being a communist when to many this was a fearsome identity to hold. In later life, she's reflected on these experiences, writing about them as an historian and as a creative writer, working on a number of causes and supporting regional history through the establishment of the Vera Deacon Regional Fund for the acquisition, preservation and study of regional historical archival resources. Now last year, those of you who were here will remember that Vera was handed the microphone almost at the end of the session, and then I, as chair, ended up in the dreadful situation of having to cut her off, having to say, wind it up, because there were people at the door saying, stop, stop, there's another session in here. I felt awful. So, I've ensured that Vera is the first speaker today. We won't have to have any of that. So, I invite Vera to address us now.
First of all, thank you. I'd like to say I feel a bit of a fraud. I'm also a coward and a bit of a mugwump, but if you can put up with those defects, I'll give it a go. I'm fraud because our chairwoman, Nancy, described me when she rang me up as the doyen of radical women, and I thought, it can't be, but I know there are women older than me, but most of them are in a home or very ill. But I was born in 1926, and I have there are three of us, three young women communists, and who are still alive. I am by chance the eldest by 2 months, so in that sense I am the elder. The second one is Iris Andrews, née Iris Morgan, the daughter of Charles Morgan, who was Secretary of the Ironworkers Association, who together with people like Charlie McCaffrey, Bill Hopkins and others, Frank Campbell, stood outside the BHP gates and helped to unionise it and get 100% unionism in the late 30s, early 40s, something which the company never forgave them. The third one is Janet Copley, who with her husband Mervyn have bequeathed to the University of Arts archive, which Johnny de Bravio's Cultural Collections section has archived and brought together. Janet and Mervyn left a great heritage of papers, not only about the Labour movement, Labour Party, Communist Party, the trade union, but also Books Hill. They went around taking photographs. Now, I'm July, Iris was born in October, Janet is in December, so I am the elder, but only by a couple of months. I'll leave it at that. So why am I radical? Maybe you'll get a few clues from my heritage, of which I'm very proud. Through my mother's Irish Catholic side, I'm descended from a woman convict who was sentenced in County Clare in 1839. She was a widow, a sort of laundress and dairy worker with 6 children, and she was sentenced for stealing. She came out to Australia in 1840, and her daughter Mary Redden married Daniel O'Connor Meehan, and I'm directly descended through my mother from that side. The other side is my father, who was born somewhere in England and brought out here. And when he was 8 years of age, he was orphaned, or he believed he was orphaned. I've since found out, since he died, that he was actually the child deserted by his father, although his mother took him and his sister back for a time, and she couldn't manage in 1912 and 13, with no supports for them then. And he was separated from her and farmed out into the Hawkesbury Valley. Only one family was kind to him, the McLaughlins. When he was 17, he was beaten badly by a man in Wollongong, and he rebelled by putting everything he owned into a sugar bag, including his banjo, and he took to the track. He went up and down New South Wales, almost to Queensland. Coming back at Grafton, he was taken in by a group of fettlers who could see he was a lad on his uppers, and they took him in as cook's spud peeler. And they said to him one night over the sing-song when he was playing the piano, playing his banjo, "You should go back to Newcastle, you might get a job there." And they smuggled him back by train, and eventually he did get a job in the coke ovens of the steelworks. My mother was born at Beltry Station, Scone in 1905. Her father was a bullock driver who brought the shearings from Beltry's with his team. After the war, the First War, when 3 of his 4 sons returned from the war, he came down to live in Mayfield, and he worked in the coke ovens of the BHP before he died in 1921. My mother tells me that her brothers were 3 of the 30 that went from Beltry Station to the First War, and one of those men was an Aboriginal Douglas Grant. And Douglas Grant, my mother always called him her black brother. So I was lucky. I had one parent who had no racial prejudice. My other parent, my father, my beloved dad, he had an Aboriginal friend on the Hunter River called Moses. And I didn't know till I was 29 why Dad was so attached to Moses. When Dad came to Newcastle first, he found the islands, and the Mosquito Islanders took him to their bosom, and they nurtured him by feeding him burgoo, porridge to you, to fatten him up. That was the term. My father was musical, and he was a great funster, a great joker, but he had a lot of anger inside of him because of the way they had been treated as state wards. They were slashed under the showers in the morning with wet towels and sworn at. So he had very little respect for authority and not much respect for people he called silvertails or heads, and also screwnecks or wowsers to you. So you can see that this anti-authoritarian or radical feeling sort of was bred into me from my very birth. I was almost born on the banks of the river up somewhere near Toole Street. My mother went into labour then, bringing their little horse in, because they had settled in a little house in a field between Woodstock Street and Toole Street. But I was actually born in Nurse Whiteman's in Hanbury Street. But I learned to crawl and walk there, and I heard the songs of the river. And we used to go down to the island and met all our friends there. In 1928, after Dad was burnt in the coke oven, we went to live on the island. Hard times set in, and by 1933 we left the island. Dad felt he might have a better chance getting work around if he was on the mainland, as we called it, at Mayfield, but it didn't work out. We couldn't pay the rent in Town, didn't get enough work despite selling fish 5 for a shilling and odd jobs, so we became inmates of 3 of the unemployed camps. My researchers turned up the names of 23 places, which was published in the Newcastle Herald in 1992 when I wrote a story called In Houseless Poverty, published under the name of Wright in Shantytown. We lived first at Shortland in a sort of bush place, then we went briefly into a house on stilts on Platts Channel. There were about 17 of those there. Then we came up to Mayfield West Hill, and we were in what my mother called a burrow until Dad raked up 5 quid, as he called it, £5, to buy this bag house whitewashed with whiting. And we lived there till 1939. In that mid-period, Dad contracted a spot in his lungs. My mother held up, and we kept the family together. And in January 1939, she presented us with another sister, and we left the camp, and because we could rent a house, a pioneer's house on Mosquito Island for 2 shillings a week. So we escaped the last of the Depression. Dad found the strength to dig a big garden, and he was a wonderful gardener, and life brightened up a lot. Down on the riverbank lived a man called Ernie with his brother Ab, Ernie had crossed the river to help build the steelworks in 1913, and he worked in the blast furnace, and I used to hear the men talking about this company. In those days, they were glad to have the work. As an islander said, well, the work's made in Newcastle. It did in many ways. They created work, they trained people. I've got to wind up. Sorry. I haven't got to where I joined the Communist Party. It was inevitable. But VHP stood for big-hearted people, very ironic, broken-hearted people, and broken hearts for profits. And it morphed into Big Harry's people, Big Harry's place. I don't know how that came about. I think it might have been a public relations exercise to sweeten the name of the company as it was leaving in 1999. I may be very hard about it, but I had a love-hate relationship with it, because when I rode the river to work during the war, I rode my little green boat through its filth. The river was a sewer, was poisoned with oil and tar and all sorts of chemicals like cyanide, everything that went in. And the company remained very intransigent about doing anything, including the smoke nuisance. And the first thing I ever did was stand for election to council on an anti-smoke nuisance campaign in 1947. I'll leave it there, but I would like to show you this. This little award began in Newcastle by the Newcastle May Day Committee. It's called the Mary Gilmore Award for short stories and poems to encourage ordinary people to write poems and stories for their journals. A Newcastle man, Alex McLagan from Carrington, a former mayor of Carrington, he won it with an essay on the Clara Street case. I have a copy of that, 2 yellow typewritten pages. In 1957, I won it for the beginners section for the short story. I'm very proud of it. I invite you to have a look at it. It's very handsome, and that was a Newcastle initiative. The next one is I bought from Danny Boyd, a BHP man who was selling these. They were raising funds. It's an image of the blast furnace in the BHP. Danny belonged to a choir and he wrote poetry. Danny died recently, leaving a book of poems, and he also left this. It shows what I feel this Writers Festival shows to the world and shows to us, that we're not only industrial people, we're not only working class, we have the finer feelings and love of literature, music and all the arts, and I thank the festival for bringing you all here, and thank you.
So the question is, the future of radicalism, where will it lie?
People felt that radicalism was dead in Newcastle. On the surface you can get that at times with the sight of TV and other things, but there's a great spirit out there. It's not dead. Consider the struggle against the T4 terminal over there on the south arm of the Hunter, which is just an industrial canal from the days I rode across it, when it was very rough and it'd take you 2 hours to get from Mosquito Island to Ingold Street where the Black Dwarf was, against a tide and a westerly gale. Now you can drive over it in 5 minutes, breathe in all the cold. So those people put in a great struggle because they're suffering, all the river suburbs, and so is Stockton. Then the struggle about the railway, inadequate consultation, lies. The city's name has been dragged in the dust by the crooks on both sides of politics, and all the decent people in both sides of the politics. Make no mistake, they are. I've worked with Liberals and I've worked with Labor and all sorts of things. There are decent people in every group, but somehow the scum seems to come to the top. 13th year as a volunteer planter up at Kooragang, the Ash Island project, rehabilitating the only part of the islands that were not destroyed in the so-called island reclamation scheme. To me, the island destruction scheme, because what was done to the islands and the estuary is a crime against nature. Now, industry is relentless. I know we need industry, but we're being overwhelmed by technology, and somehow or other, for the very sake of humanity and our survival on the earth, we've got to get a better balance. So I say dead. So the here has given you another aspect. All they're concerned about is development to make money. It doesn't matter what we destroy and how we damage the atmosphere, our Mother Earth, or how we damage and hurt human beings. So I'm flying the flag for radicalism. I'm still in there. It's true, we did suffer, my husband and I and our children, but we really lived and we survived, and I'm still going on, and so is my family. And my husband lost his work 3 times solely because of his politics, twice here in Newcastle and once in Sydney, but we survived and we won through. And I'm very proud to fly the flag of radicalism in all its strands. We've got to unite